Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Wednesday, November the 19th in the Memorial Arena. I'd like to start by thanking our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff who make it all happen. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack show. So Walter, since I've got all the topics today, I'll start off. The headline in the Times Colonist today is Wednesday the 19th, is half of the top of the front page. Wallet stolen as woman 80 sat in her car. And then the subheadline, Saanich police warn solo shoppers to be wary in mall parking lots. So I know everybody's got their own interpretation of what things mean, that's for sure. But the way I see this story is that first they create, and I mean talking about the people who run the country, first they create this society of increasing poverty and increasing income gap, which they know creates crime. That's just the way it is. That's not really a question that can be talked about. That's just a fact. So first they create the crime, and then the same people who own the media use that crime to make us afraid and to disturb our society, disrupt our society. So be afraid now about walking in a mall parking lot. That's what they want. That's the society the corporations are creating in this country, because that's the society they want. We don't have to have that kind of society, but if we don't want it, we've got to take over our country again. And you just mentioned something I mentioned something I talked about last week, which was we brought up the issue of the fact that the Bush family was part owner of a bank that was funneling money, not part owner, but a top executive of a bank that was funneling money to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis prior to World War II, and in fact prior to the Nazis coming to power. So they were, essentially the Bush family was helping to fund Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. And I asked the question, will any of the media pick this up? Will they tell us this story? Because this is news. This is breaking news, because nobody will ever talk about it, so nobody really knows about it. But that's not on the front page of the Times Colonist or anywhere in the media. I don't want to pick on the Times Colonist. What we get instead is, woman 80, as they try to create fear in our society, but they will never tell us the truth.
In the States, I read several articles a while back about how the Walmart parking lots, which are like massive, several acres in size many times, are not policed. The only security Walmart has is inside the store, probably the same way here. Those big parking lots are a no man's land for lawlessness, because that's private property. The police don't patrol that regularly. It's a long ways from your car to the front door sometimes. It's a dangerous place to be. I don't think they were talking about that in the article.
Yeah.
But, that's, to me, the climate of fear, of course, is always the issue. They always want to make us fearful. It just sells, you sell security systems. You have to have more police officers, We're crying for cameras to be pointed at us in every corner.
Yeah, it disrupts the society, and I think that's what they want. They want our society to be disrupted, because I don't think the corporations really need us here anymore.
They want us begging for more security. The last thing in the world I think we need is more security. We just need a more civilized society, and and this kind of just, I think, plays into that, just a sort of a national security state, really.
Yeah, and when you say we need a more civilized society, that comes from a society that's more equal in wealth and income distribution. I read a book about this a while ago. It's absolutely amazing. If you create a society, and it doesn't matter if the nation is rich or poor, as long as everybody within the nation is fairly even, you have a better society in virtually every way. But once you create the gap in income and wealth, which the people who run our country, I mean, they're masters. They want everything, and they'll take everything from everybody else. And they create a society which functions well for them because they get all the money, but begins to have a lot of serious problems which all of the rest of us have to deal with in a million different ways.
Yeah, we could we could have that. I mean, it always boils down to, you know, if the citizens really want to have something, we have it. We could have that. It's just that we have that roadblock in between for communication because we're relying on corporate media to help us communicate with each other, and that's
the other
that's a
thing we
mistake.
need is actually topic 2, which is our politicians,
Yeah,
who, if they represented what we wanted, we'd start to build a different country. So we just had our city elections. We've elected new mayors in the 2 biggest municipalities, Victoria and Saanich. Where I don't know if it'll make any difference. I hope it will. I mean, what I'd love to see is the new city councils in all of our municipalities turn away from being, well, turn towards the citizenry,
yeah.
and start to ask people, what do you want? What do you want here? What do you want there? What are the important issues? What could make a better community for all of us? And start to do that. I mean, that would be, you know, it's a time for great things to be happening.
Yeah.
And that's one that could happen.
I think the mayors I'm feeling good about it. I mean, I think this fresh blood, Jack. You know, I think it's good to see new people in, and there's a chance that they could do something. Those mayors have to really go after their the bureaucracy in those city halls, and identify those people that have their agendas that are not for the best interest of the public, and hold their feet to the fire and say, no, hang on, you're a public servant, you know.
And if you don't start working for the public, you're going to get fired.
You
I
can
mean,
get
that's what
fired.
we should be talking about.
Like, you know what happened with the Blue Bridge and all the misinformation that the mayor and council were getting from the staff.
And putting out to us.
That's right. So, you know, I think fresh blood, new people in there asking the questions. They might not necessarily be getting the answers they want to hear, and hopefully they got the energy to say, no, we want to get to the bottom of this.
Well, you know, why don't we ever have meetings between the citizens and our elected representatives? I mean, for the last month, we've seen all their signs. They're coming to our doors. Vote for me. I'll do anything you want. But the day after the election, they disappear into the victors into City Hall, and we never get to see them again. We can attend the council meetings, but those are kind of their meetings. And it's interesting because, you know, I've been to a few, and, you know, the citizens, we sit kind of in the cheap seats.
Yeah.
But our exalted rulers, the people we've elected to city council, I mean, no money has been spared in creating a nice situation for them. And the mayor in Victoria sits literally upon a throne.
Yeah, it kind of looks a little odd. And I notice, like, when people come to the mic, they always thank the mayor and the council for allowing them to come to speak. I don't feel like I'm that beholding that I should be thanking them too much. You know, they're there to do a job. Obviously, people are going to be coming with problems. You're not, you know, yeah, that's why people go to these council meetings, and the mayor and council should be really open to having input from the public and not to make it an onerous process. Oh, it's ridiculous how, you know, they give you the 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and it's so stifling. You know, there's nothing wrong with opening this up and making it more accessible for the public. And perhaps they'd find some new ideas. People would be more willing to come and participate if it wasn't such a tough process.
Yeah, I think we should be talking about the process. How do we think that our city government should relate to us, the citizens? For example, there's a group called Open Victoria, and they've done over the last several months a great job of actually ferreting out, I think it was only in Victoria, how our city councillors voted on a number of very important issues that were the city business. And, you know, Open Victoria, I heard somebody on the radio, and he was saying it was a real job to try to find out how people had voted. It's just not accessible. You can find it, but you have to look and look and look, which is what they did. And they brought forward how in Victoria, the mayor and councillors voted on a variety of issues. Well, let's say our city council came to us right now and said to the people of Victoria, and in every one of the municipalities, citizens, do you want to be able to find out how we voted on important issues so you can know the truth about, what we think about? Or do you want us to make it really difficult for you to find out how we voted? And what do you think our answer would be?
Yeah.
And yet it's the exact opposite. So these are some of the fundamentally important. We have to run the show.
Yeah.
And we don't. We are powerless and pathetic, and we've got to take it back.
Well, I don't think I'm that pathetic. I mean, I think we have access, Jack, a certain amount of it. We still live in a fairly free society, as much as there are a lot of problems. To maintain the facade that there's a lot of freedoms, they have to allow us to do certain things, at least. And we should take every opportunity to participate, because there's a lot of countries where we can't, there really nothing can be done. And
well, I'm not sure it's that different here. I mean, look at the issue you worked on so hard, which was smart meters. These things are dangerous, useless, expensive, and a lot of people don't want them on their homes, and yet they're on all of our homes now. If we're talking about a way that we can participate, I mean, thousands of people worked very, very hard. And yet,
yeah, that is a particular case, and it's really a very disappointing,
But isn't every case like that?
Well, it can be. I mean, what you have is when the lessons have to be learned about but who you are opposing, and you have to realize the electrical industry really is one of the largest, if not the largest, industry in the world. They have interests to protect. Putting in electronic surveillance devices, otherwise known as smart meters, on homes was part of a global agenda, and is part of a global agenda. And they know how to steamroll the public. They know how to pressure regulators. They put people in place years in advance to make sure that there's no roadblocks. The Liberal government changed legislation for years to grease the skids for this. I mean, they're so much further ahead of us in the game. I mean, the lessons have been learned, by the way, and in any other campaigns that I'd participate in, I'd certainly approach it differently in some ways, because we have to realize that they have endless resources, and they have skills beyond anything we could ever pretend to have. But the thing is, in the end, I believe that when something's fundamentally wrong, it is a matter of time. It's just when things are wrong, more and more discontent will come out. I think we're setting on a cauldron right now, boiling cauldron of discontent in British Columbia. And unfortunately, we don't have a political party that can oppose the Liberals other than the NDP, who almost on every policy are as bad or worse. So we're in a really tough spot here. I think, the solutions that we have to look for have to be political, because we can't do it through our regulators. They're controlled by the industry, not only the electrical industry, by the pharmaceutical industry and by the large oil industry. They're players. They're in there. They have their own people in these ministries, Ministry of the Environment, Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health. You can start naming the names.
So in fact, can we say that the corporations run our governments?
On the big portfolios, the deputy ministers start looking at their backgrounds. They're right from the industry. They're right from, if you're looking at Ministry of Education, one of the biggest issues that we're facing with Wi-Fi in schools, in comes the parachute from a TELUS executive is now running the Ministry of Education.
And I remember when clear-cut logging was the big issue in this province going back 20 and 30 years. The Forest Act was written by somebody who worked for the forest industry. He came into the government for a period of a year or two, however long it took, and then he went back into his top-level corporate job. But when he was I think he was the deputy minister, that's when they wrote the Forest Act. You know,
It's so fundamentally wrong and unjust, Jack. And I know I've come here and complained so many times about it, but the thing is, if John Horgan and the NDP, you know, just got some courage and got some guts and said, no, we're representing the people here, we're not representing corporations. And right now they've sold us out, the NDP and the people that are cowed by the leadership. Somehow they can't, they're afraid to challenge their own leadership. The whole thing around the Adrian Dix in the election, and he was definitely duped into taking the profile that he did during that election, and they tricked him into that. And the NDP top brass participated in a coup, really a political coup, and allowed Christy Clark to be elected. There's a lot of evidence to support that. And we just simply, you're talking about front page news. We got lots of headlines on that story if anybody ever cared to pick it up. And that's, to me, the betrayal of the NDP. I can understand the corporate agenda. I can understand the Christy Clark crowd. They're all pro-industry, pretty straightforward. But when the opposition is pro-industry and pretends not to be,
well, actually, I completely understand what they're doing. I completely understand it, because they want to get elected, and they know who controls this province, and it's big business and the media that's owned by big business. So if the NDP wants to be successful and get elected, they have to do as they're told.
I don't agree with you on that.
I agree. Yes, you're right. They could step forward and side with the people, but they won't do it.
They could get landslide victories. If the NDP had have opposed smart meters, they would have got whipped in on a landslide.
Well,
so
it would have helped.
Well, I mean, believe me, for them to use that excuse constantly, we just have a fascist society, so we just have to act like fascists too to get elected. It doesn't hold any water. There's enough intelligence in this society to understand what's right or wrong. And, in my view, the major policies of the Liberal Party are fundamentally wrong. They're destroying the environment. They're destroying our society. They're dismantling it bit by bit, along with the assistance of Stephen Harper. And we deserve an opposition, somebody that's going to stand up and say, no, this is wrong.
You're absolutely right.
And we're in a bad spot right now. There's so much discontent in this province, and I'm sure across this country, that they think they can maintain control of it. But my view is, over time, you can't suppress the truth.
The one big problem is that when the power structure feels threatened by the very discontent that you're talking about, they create wars.
Yeah.
And if you look at what's happening in the world today, that's exactly what they seem to be doing. They're creating an outside enemy who may or may not ever attack us, but we're going to focus on that enemy. They will do whatever is necessary. I mean, we talked earlier about the Bush family, that bank funneling money to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. I mean, the power structure in America helped to create the Nazis, and the media here will never report it. And we're going through exactly the same process now. We've got to be very careful. And we don't even know what's going on, but we have to be very careful not to believe the stories they're telling us, because only disaster awaits us if we do. And we've got to retake our country.
With the CBC being dismantled, and that was our last bastion for real criticism, and some very serious journalism did occur in the CBC. CBC News there's been problems with it for years, but now with the CBC being dismantled by the Harper regime, it's very, very troubling, because you could have a situation where, there's just no one going to be telling those stories. And the only stories that are going to be told are those that are going to be, pleasing to the corporate elite.
Well, we may not have the CBC, but we do have the Walter and Jack show. Yikes, we're in big trouble, folks. Oh yeah, I know somebody who comes in from Langford every day, and it's during rush hour it's a drive, and it just made me think of how wonderful it could be if we had trains, trams, nice trains running from Langford to downtown Victoria every day, rush hour maybe every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever's needed, with at certain stops express buses heading out maybe to the hospital, to the university, to a few other places, coming in on the E&N line, right? I mean, the track is there. Why aren't we making use of it? We can have safe and clean and comfortable and quiet and pleasant public transport if we want, and we should put more resources into it, but the people who run the country won't. They hate public transit because we're supposed to be driving cars and burning gas, and that's how the country is run.
There's quite a bottleneck because I get caught in that on occasion. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense that there is one. Jack, there's buses. You can put more buses on the road. You can just do very small initiatives like employers could give incentives to their employees to take the bus. You can have to get refunds on your parking if you're working for an employer that had to provide a parking stall. So there's a lot of incentives there, and I think if people had an efficient way to get from the western communities into downtown, you're going to find that they would use it. But right now, it's a system that really it's just too onerous, and people just end up getting back in their cars and using their cars.
And that's the way things in this country are run. So that's one example of all the many things that we've got to change, and we can. We can do a lot better than we are doing on a lot of different issues. For example, our schools can be open in the evening, and centers for badminton and ping pong and classes and clubs. Why aren't they open? Because the people who run the country they want us shopping in their malls. We're out of time. Thank you, Walter.
Always a pleasure, Jack.
Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Hello and welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Wednesday, November the 19th. Our guest in this segment is Dr. Neil McKinney. You are a naturopathic physician.
That's right.
And you specialize in cancer treatment.
That's right. I started in cancer research before this, and my entire life has been devoted to cancer research and treatment.
So when you say you started in cancer research, you mean you were working kind of for the pharmaceutical industry doing research?
Mostly radiation research at the BC Cancer Research Foundation. One part of it was drugs that make tumors more sensitive to radiation, but the other was new radiation therapies.
And somewhere along the line, you moved away from that and into naturopathic and alternative medicines.
Yeah, I was in cancer research a little over 5 years. I'd known Terry Fox, and when he passed away in 1981, I wasn't happy with how the money was spent. It was going to just more of the same old, including some things we'd been working on that weren't very fruitful. So I went to look at Chinese medicine, homeopathic and naturopathic alternative medicine to see if there's anything there that a scientific mind could find and put to use.
And what did you find?
Well, I found a lot of things, actually. I do have a lot of Chinese herbs that I use, and they can be very, very useful, especially for symptom management, but mostly nutraceuticals, food derivatives, vitamins. Intravenous vitamin C is a popular example, but many other nutraceuticals and botanicals, herbal medicines, things like wormwood and other herbs that have been used for centuries in traditional medicine around the world, now adapting to use with cancer.
And not really for centuries, but for thousands of years.
Yeah, for thousands of years. Sometimes doctors will say what they're doing nowadays with drug medicine is traditional medicine, but really it's a bit of an upstart compared to those systems.
Yeah. And they work.
Yes, they do. They always have.
You mentioned, as we were talking before, I brought up the subject of chemotherapy.
Yes.
And you said something that I found quite shocking. I think you said, if I understood you correctly, that 50 people have to be treated with chemotherapy in order for one of those 50, on average, to live for a longer time.
That's right. About 2% of people who get chemo actually have longer survival. They may have a longer period where they're not suffering with big tumors and obvious overt disease, but the actual lifespan is not typically increased, but for about in the United States, 2.1%. And this was published in the top journal, in Journal of Clinical Oncology, 2004.
I find that to be, I thought people got chemo because it helped them.
Yeah, it can help knock down the cancer and give
Yeah.
them a remission, a period of a little golden time when they're not suffering so much. They pay a little price, they get sick during the chemo, somewhat at least,
Okay.
but then there can be this disease-free survival. But the actual reoccurrence of the cancer is often quite common. It's more often the surgeon that's cured the cancer than the chemo doctors or the radiation doctors.
Okay. Well, you know, and if it does help anybody, I don't. You've written a book about, and I think this is the book.
Yes, actually. Yeah, so this is actually my fourth book. It's the second edition under this title. So I've written 4 over the years. First one in 2003. So this is a textbook in my field. I'm a professor of this at med schools, but I also teach postgraduate courses for MDs and NDs and lecture conferences, you know, medical education, continuing education conferences, that sort of thing. So this has become a textbook in the field. It describes the natural medicines, homeopathic, Chinese medicine, nutraceuticals, herbals that treat cancer, diet, that sort of thing.
So, can you talk a little bit about some aspects of the book? It's called Naturopathic Oncology.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the naturopathic treatment of cancer.
Correct.
And what are some of the treatments and how do they work?
Well, for example, mistletoe has been used for over 100 years now in Europe. It grows on trees. It's a little less poisonous, the European mistletoe, than North American. You know, most people know mistletoe here is a plant that you kiss under at Christmas. But it's used in cancer by injection or intravenously. It's been used by about 80% now of medical doctors giving chemo and radiation in Europe, say Germany, Denmark. I lived in Denmark. My first wife was an oncology nurse. So we know that it's very, very widely used there. It was actually accepted for use recently by the BC Cancer Agency, but it's hard to know that because their webpage regarding mistletoe hasn't been edited since the year 2000. But the Medical Advisory Council has decided that there is enough evidence to suggest that it's safe and helpful during chemo.
So what does mistletoe do?
Well, it reduces a lot of the side effects, but the main thing is it's an immune stimulant. It helps the immune system turn against the cancer. So usually the immune system is trying to protect and heal your own cells and only attack things that are foreign. So it looks at these cancer cells as sick cells that it wants to fix, just like if they're infected or inflamed by something else. So it tries to nurse and protect them. But the mistletoe helps turn the immune system to attack mode to kill the cancer. And this is really key to the way I support chemotherapy and radiation. Chemo and radiation can never kill the last cell, but the good news is that when they achieve some improvement is because they set the stage with a whole bunch of dead cells, whole debris field of healthy and cancerous cells, that the immune system will then go into cleanup mode and wipe the slate clean and kill those last cells that were either resistant to the treatment or you couldn't deliver the drug because of blood flow issues in that tumor, that sort of thing. So it actually would biologically takes an infinite dose of chemo to kill the last cell, but thank goodness the immune system, if intact, will finish that job. So that's what the Europeans figured out, that mistletoe does that. The Asians have figured out astragalus, which is a root, herbal therapies help the immune system defeat the cancer. And so these are strong supports for chemo that make much better outcomes. In the meantime, they reduce the drop in the blood cell counts, reduce fatigue and symptoms. So it reduces the harm, increases effectiveness.
Okay.
Win-win.
Aside from helping with the side effects of chemo, are there naturopathic and other treatments that can be used instead of chemo and radiation in order to deal with and hopefully cure cancer?
Yes, absolutely. So the main mechanism that radiation and chemo work by is oxidative stress, busts up the DNA. So when cancer cells are they're often doubling. They're growing too fast, right? So they're doubling and they have get caught with 2 sets of chromosomes. So things that damage the DNA, they get a double hit and they can't repair it, whereas hopefully a healthy cell can repair that. So most of the chemo drugs and radiation oxidative stress is anti-DNA. It's a genetic poison. So those cells are being busted up by that. There's actually a lot of natural agents that do the same thing. Green tea, curcumin, alpha lipoic acid. I could name 30 things that do that. So that's always a strategy. One of the other contributions I made to the field is that the different cancers have different things that make them grow. We know, say, breast cancer may have estrogen making it grow. Prostate cancer may have testosterone making it grow. So we have things that are anti-estrogen or anti-testosterone, for example, or anti the receptors of those. And there's hundreds of different growth factors involved in different cancers. So I've been trying to sort out what are the specific growth factors for each different types of cancer, for lymphoma or prostate or breast or brain cancer, and then find natural agents that target those. And there's things that we can target that they wish they had a drug for, I can assure you. For example, with pancreatic cancer, it's a very difficult cancer. The chemo tends to only increase life by a month to 6 months. But something very simple from cabbage, indole-3-carbinol, poisons the number one growth factor for pancreatic cancer, which is a DNA copying factor. It costs about $30 a month. It's in the health foods already. Anybody can buy it. It's approved by Health Canada. And it actually stifles the pancreas. I've had a lot of cases that have lived a number of years at least with that, whereas the conventional care would have lost them quite a bit sooner. So there are these, we find these sort of general principles like going after the oxidative stress principle, but there's lots of other targets that we can use natural medicines against.
Can we talk for a moment about causes of cancer? Do you deal with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we work a lot with diet, and of course diet is important, and people get cancer from a lot of reasons. There's a small percentage due to genetic factors, and we can actually are learning how to manipulate those and actually reverse those, to redifferentiate, to turn back on the growth controlling genes, turn off the growth stimulating genes. That's called epigenetics, and it's a very popular topic in medicine now. And things like sulforaphanes from broccoli sprouts do this. Very simple things do this. But there's just so many other possible strategies that we can use against them, that we can target, prevent the toxic damage from heavy metals, by testing for heavy metals and remove those. We know that cadmium and mercury trigger some cancers. We know that solvents and pesticides are very involved in lymphomas, leukemia, so we can give people infrared saunas and deal with those. But we can also put them on cleansing diets, that flush some of these things out, like Europeans typically do every spring. Dandelion leaf and dandelion root, and you flush the liver and get rid of toxins. So there's many things we can do to get down to the causes, but one of the most fundamental causes is something called insulin-like growth factor 1, and this has to do with meat and dairy and sugar. It's found naturally in the herd animals, and so when we eat meat and dairy, we get these things. Unfortunately, most of the meat and dairy in this country, they are doubling the production by feeding corn silage, and this doubles the concentration of this growth factor. I think it's a really big problem. But our livers will we're omnivores, we're not like the herd animals, but we will make that factor if we overeat sugar. If our insulin goes up to a certain level, then the liver makes the insulin growth factor. And this unleashes the growth potential of those cells. Normal cells have a little cap on them, stops them from dividing, and they're only replaced when they die by a stem cell. The number of cells in your heart, in your liver, in your lung are very constant right now, Jeff. But in a cancerous tumor, the cells are doubling and doubling and doubling. They're growing exponentially. So it turns out that it's this insulin-like growth factor, when it builds up in the cell, it takes off this protective chemical that all of a sudden now that cell can start dividing again, just like it did in a fetus, in a little embryo. So we get that exponential growth rate, just like in the first 3 months of a little embryo growing, of largely unspecialized cells just building cell after cell after cell. So if we can reduce the sugar and carbohydrates in the diet and reduce the meat and dairy and replace them with more wholesome foods. It turns out fish and seafood is a very good food for cancer, and poultry with the skin and fat is at least neutral, and nuts and seeds are good, that sort of thing. So we do try and make people moderate their meat and dairy intake. It doesn't have to be zero, but it has to be quite moderate. And then watch their sugar load. And those are huge things to help prevent cancer. Vitamin D has been shown. There's a long list. There's a big chapter on prevention. It's got a lot of entries. Vitamin D is a very important one that's deficient in Canadians, and just recently been recognized. Now Health Canada, Cancer Society say take vitamin D.
I wish this stuff was, well, I guess it is. I mean, everybody knows we should eat better and yeah. I'll ask, what have you found is helpful of cancer patients, which I guess means what do you do to help them?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess
Sure.
we've talked about a bit of it.
So I definitely practice an integrative model and glad to support people if they want through surgery. Things like a low salt diet, for example, helps wound healing. So we recommend that around surgery time and so forth. Zinc and vitamin A help. We have supports for radiation like melatonin and curcumin and fish oils. And we have supports for chemotherapy like astragalus formulas and mistletoe, etc. But people eventually finish those therapies and sometimes want something to reinforce them. And of course, there are people who, rightly or wrongly, decide not to take chemo, radiation, or surgery and want an alternative, and we provide that. One of the most exciting things, it's just blowing the roof off this whole cancer industry, is there's a paper about to be published on this out of Seattle showing that an extract of wormwood has been used in malaria combined with IV vitamin C, and I put mistletoe in that, by the way, that combination is getting an 80% response rate in stage 4 cancers. Now they're going to publish a paper regarding breast cancer showing this. I have a colleague who runs the IV, is in my office, Dr. Caesar, practices in Winnipeg and Victoria, and we have a nurse who covers when he's not here. Well, he's treated over 200 patients. He's actually only had 2 non-responders out of 200.
So what does that mean?
This is with advanced cancer.
So people with advanced cancer then, who are I guess close to death, are getting a response to, are responding to positively. What does that mean?
Well, we very quickly typically restore a lot of the quality of life. The energy comes back, and they often reduce their pain and need for meds. And that's quite easy with some of the things I developed years ago, like green tea, curcumin, grapeseed was a combination, for example, that got people to that point. But to actually shrink the tumors, this is what we've been struggling with to perfect over the years. And we've got to that point now where there's a couple of different more aggressive therapies, and particularly intravenous ones, that actually knock the tumors down, shrink them away, and put people into a full remission. And time will tell. This is a fairly new therapy. It's just come about this year, actually early this year. So it'll take a while to see if anybody's really cured, say 5 years cured. But it certainly looks like we can achieve that with these things. And we've taken people who are going on a very short life expectancy who now appear to be cancer-free, no end in sight.
Yeah. So is this widespread? Is this becoming part of the more general cancer treatment in Canada, or is
No, not really. Many of the naturopathic schools don't have a course in oncology, and a lot of the naturopathic doctors aren't well trained in this. There's a group in the States, a specialty society that I belong to, and there's 300 or so doctors belong to that, 100 of whom are certified as naturopathic oncologists, as they call themselves down in the United States. So there's a few hundred of us who have some significant knowledge in this out of thousands of naturopathic doctors. And of course, it's been hard for naturopathic doctors to break into the mainstream. But I actually, just in the last few months, I've had a flood of referrals from oncologists, specialists. I've always had some support. But I would say some of the docs who've been very resistant in the past are now openly referring to me. I've been asked to provide IV solutions to cancer patients in hospitals locally. It really is opening up.
Good for them.
I paid my dues, and now we're getting there.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I mean, everybody who is sick has got to keep looking for, there are very often answers out there.
Absolutely.
So you're currently located in Victoria. How long have you been here, and what's next? And you've only got about 1 minute.
Yes, I've been here about 15 years. I was 15 years in Vernon. And we hope, Dr. Caesar and I hope within 2 years to open a center that's actually a live-in center where we can teach people how to eat and cook and shop and handle food better, but deliver these therapies, actually have inpatients. Someone can come from out of town, well, we do get people from around the world already, but who can come and stay here in Victoria, sort of a bed and breakfast sort of thing, but with an IV room, and get treatment for a month, 2 months, and go home happy.
Wow, that's
so
a big...
basically a
small
an
hospital.
alternative cancer hospital, yes. That's my goal within the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, well, I wish you good luck.
Thank you.
I sure hope that can happen.
Oh, it's going to happen.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
sure of it.
So, Dr. Neil McKinney, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And thank you all for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum. I'd like to thank again the Shaw crew and our volunteer, the Shaw staff and our volunteer crew who make it happen. All they've got to do is fix me up. Our guest in this segment is Will Smith. Will, you've been on the show several times, and we're going to start off by talking about, and first I'd like to say that is a very nice hat.
Thank you.
And then we're going to talk about consciousness.
Yes, well, that's what I want to talk about, because the hat keys right into that. As you know, I'm interested in consciousness and what it is and how it works. And consciousness, I've heard defined as the ability to create mentally an experience that you've had, or even an experience that you haven't had, but to create mentally an experience. And so what happens during that time is the same types of things happen to our neurochemicals as if we're actually having the experience. But anyway, I spend a lot of time with a 4-year-old taking care of him, and he thinks he's Batman most of the time, but sometimes he isn't Batman. Anyway, so I just started wearing this hat just so I could get into the game. And one of the things that's amazing to me with a 4-year-old is how fast they can change consciousness. I mean, you can be fighting off bad guys, you can be walking down the street fighting off goblins, bad guys, vampires, all sorts of different things, and running away from zombies, and then just flip, change, and then you're back. And you have to be able to keep up with that. So that's really been a challenge for me, because this is a new thing for me, taking care of grandchildren. I've been a corporate president and a money manager, and these are not compatible with taking care of children. Children don't get those things. So anyway, I started wearing this hat, and I noticed that when I wear this hat, people smile at me, and they say hello to me. Yeah. So I just think that's a great thing. I mean, that's a change of consciousness for the people who see me and for myself. And anyway, when I came to Victoria, when I immigrated here. I've been here on and off since 2007, but I started immigrating in 2010 and became a permanent resident in 2012. And I told everybody that I was a musician when they asked me, "What are you?" And when I brought my settler's load in, when I became a permanent resident, they looked at me. It looked at all my stuff, and the guy looked at me and said, "Oh, you're a musician, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I am." So anyway, thanks to all the people here that I know who have helped me to create that, because before that, I was never a musician. I was a company president and a money manager, but not a musician. And it takes some change in me to get there. And this hat kind of helps me think of myself as a musician instead of a guy wearing a necktie and a suit.
Well, it's a very nice hat. There's something about that hat. It's a very friendly hat, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then I wanted to talk a little bit about my consciousness changing about being here in Canada, because I've had one of the biggest things was when Mehdi was talking about how he had that thing from the BC Ministry of Education, I think. And remember about the job opportunity?
Oh, yes.
And so, as I said on my last show, I like this idea that of this, we're all little monkeys on this planet, and we really aren't in charge. We think we're in charge, but I kind of like it. It's cute, that we're little monkeys and we're trying to be important and we're trying to run this planet. But it really isn't. It really doesn't belong to us, and we really don't know what we're doing. And so I wanted to talk about. We can go in a couple of different places with that. The big news for me in the past couple of weeks is for 10 years I've been talking to people and reading and talking to people about a set of books from Russia called Anastasia, which is Anastasia is a woman who's a shaman in Siberia, in this area called the taiga, which is part of the same boreal forest, if that's how you pronounce it in English, that stretches from Russia across Canada. So technically we're in the same forest area. And anyway, she predicted when these books were published back in the 90s that the Russian government at some point would give people, anybody who wanted it, 2.5 acres or 1 hectare of land to create what they call a Kins domain, which is like a small family eco-village. But it's a planned place where you can grow food and just exist and live. So anyway, she predicted that would be a solution to Russia's problems. They've been losing people for a long time because of their history. And so anyway, this is now coming to pass. It's been happening in local regions for over the past 10 years. But now there's a bill before the Duma, which is the Russian parliament, to make this a reality, to make this a sort of a right, that if you want a piece of land, they have to give you a piece, the Russian government will have to give you a piece of land, and you will be able to hold that land as long as you live there, and your children and grandchildren, your heirs, and none of the land couldn't be taxed, won't be able to be taxed, and none of the produce from that land will be taxed. So this is kind of an interesting thing. Now, up until this year, I saw it just as something that might happen, but it might not. But the news that I see now is that Vladimir Putin is behind this now. He sees it as an end run around some of the problems that Russia has experienced because of the sanctions. And so, and also because of the World Trade Organization, their country is flooded with cheap goods that put their companies and their people out of business. So I think this is a really interesting thing to see if we're going towards a new world, if we're going towards a new way of being, a new civilization, and this is what I think we're going to go through, is some kind of a transition, because it's obvious that governments are not responding to what's really happening. I mean, the politicians are, as far as I can see, are all basically clueless, and the ones in the West see the bus headed for the cliff, and so their reaction is to say, quick, lock the doors, paint the windows black so nobody can see what's happening, and keep going. You know, that's how. Do you disagree with that, or do you think that's an exaggeration?
No, I think if we look at what's happening in the world today, that's exactly what's happening, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a big failing in our political system that a few people at the top, just the very few people who run the show, because we're all on that same bus, and we're all heading towards, it seems, a disaster, and yet the 99.8% of us, we seem powerless to stop it. They don't even ask us. They just keep going towards that cliff.
Right, so this to me is a huge piece of news, and this is really news because this is something that's different. There is no news. It's all just reruns. But this is news because this is giving people, this is giving individuals, families really, sovereignty over a piece of land and saying we can't touch you anymore. And well, another thing that Putin sees about it is that it can make Russia the largest producer of organic produce and also non-GMO. Russia does not allow non-GMO. So if we're looking at the world and we're looking for, gee, we're headed off into this place where it looks like World War III is going to happen, and it looks like, you know, this is crazy. How are we going to get over here to where we're looking at a place that's peaceful and people are getting along together, and we have a new social structure where, you know, it's more like direct democracy instead of something where people's will can be turned into something that it definitely isn't. So how do we get there? Well, this is the first piece of news that I've seen that shows you both sides. Because you can look at that from the side of somebody who wants to make organic gardening, do organic gardening, and say, yeah, that's going to work. And you can look at it from a side of somebody who in Russia at least, who says, I want to get around these sanctions. How can we get around these sanctions that the West is putting on? So it works for both sides. And the other thing I just want to talk about is the technology that's involved in this, because I think we ignore the technology. We think that somehow we've got the best technology. But in the first book, I didn't bring the first book, but in the first book of Anastasia, which is just called, I think it's called Anastasia, which means resurrection in Greek, by the way. And that's a theme that you'll find, resurrection, coming back to life, that we can talk about. But anyway, she talks about how plants are much more complicated than we think they are, and that their DNA is, the way plants have been designed, they complement what our systems need. So if when you plant a plant, if you involve your DNA with the plant's DNA, which is typically done by saliva or sweat, then that informs the plant's DNA, and the plant is better able to provide nutrients for the people whose DNA is mixed with it. So she recommends that you put the seed in your mouth before you plant it, and that when you're taking care of your garden, that you take your shoes off and walk around your garden and you take care of it barefoot. So that sounds, that sounds pretty woo-woo. How does this shamanic person know what she's talking about? And I must admit, when I first read that about 10 years ago, it was kind of shocking to me. I thought, there's nothing behind this. She doesn't tell how it works, but she just says this works. And then I picked up a book by John Perkins, whom I've also mentioned. He's the guy who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He worked for the U.S. government, and his job was to go get resources from other undeveloped countries and offer the guy in charge, you can have either a bullet or a Swiss bank account. Which one would you prefer? We are going to take your copper, or whatever it was. Anyway, he's gotten onto the shamanic thread, and I just like to, in the beginning of the book, he's got, he talks about what happens when they plant corn in South America. And he talks about the same thing, about how the shaman grabs, he takes the corn and he puts it in his mouth and he says a chant and he does some blessings, and then he spits the corn to the earth. So he's doing the exact same thing. Well, maybe he doesn't know, maybe the shaman doesn't know how that works. Maybe our science doesn't know. Of course it doesn't know how that works. We call it junk DNA, for goodness sake, so we don't know what it is. We just call it junk. But these guys know, and they also know how important the intention is. And our materialistic culture does not, none of that, it has a place. But we just heard from Dr. McKinney, and intention is very important. You have to want to get better. He can't heal you if you don't want to be healed. You can die. So this is very interesting that we're learning that these shamans have this knowledge. They may not know how it works. They may not be able to explain it to you with a chemical chain, but they know what to do, and they do it. So I think that's really interesting, that we may be just throwing away all this technology if we are successful in getting GMO established. Isn't that interesting, though, that there may be advanced technology in our food that we don't know about and that we're throwing away?
Yes.
And instead, we're going like this.
Yeah. You wanted to talk a little bit about cannabis and marijuana.
Oh, yeah.
One and the same.
Well, the first time I met Dr. McKinney, I was out doing a video of Rick Simpson, who is in Sydney, and he was talking about his experiences. And here's a guy who...
And he uses cannabis.
He's used cannabis, so he used it to heal himself,
right.
And he's used it to cure thousands of other people of all sorts of things, but he's persona non grata in Canada. I mean, I talked to him and he says, he's looking for a place to live because his life has basically been destroyed here. Even though he went to the police when he was going to grow cannabis to heal himself, and he just said, I'm going to be growing a lot of cannabis because he uses oil and it's non-psychoactive, but he has to grow a lot. And at first it was okay, but I think when he started getting more news about it, it shut him down pretty much. So, but anyway, this is something else. I was reading, we had a guest on here who was talking about some research about cannabis, and I was listening to this and I was just thinking, well, that doesn't agree with the stuff that I've heard. I've heard other research that doesn't sound like it's horrible. I mean, people are getting cured from cancer with it and other things too.
It's a wonderful plant.
Yeah, and I just read these. I get this news feed from a previous life from the Business Insider, and they had some really interesting articles on long-term studies of cannabis users and also magic mushroom users. And they showed that this stuff is increasing the connections in the brain. And I think one of the problems is it's been illegal to do all this research for as long as I've been alive. So there isn't any good research out there.
You mean it's illegal to do research on?
It has been in the past. Where could you do it? What country? If you weren't, even if you could, you might be able to do it. You'd still be so stigmatized from wanting to do this research that it's difficult. Right. So anyway, so I just took this one little picture out of the article, and it shows. This is from the psilocybin mushroom article, and it shows on this side you have the connections of a quote normal person's brain and all the little connections that are happening. And when they take psilocybin mushrooms, all these new connections form. And so what they're finding...
you see things differently.
Yeah, so you see things differently, but also the thing that it does is if you have a rut, if you're in a rut, some things are like a mental, it's like you're off in a snowbank by the side of the road and you just can't get out. Your connection, you just go over and over the same connection and you're just obsessing or you're depressed. Right. And so what this does is one shot, boom. For some people it works. They get out of that and they're not depressed anymore. So I don't know about this stuff. I have a high school education, but I read these things and I think that this is important stuff, which leads me into one other topic. I think that really I've lived in a bunch of different places. I've lived in France, Germany, the United States, Costa Rica, Panama, and now here. And I feel like some of the time I get bullied here. Like I got a call. I got really sick this summer from eating some gluten. I didn't know I was gluten sensitive, but I was, and I didn't eat it for many months. And then all of a sudden I ate 4 pieces of pizza, and I thought I was going to die. And I went to all these doctors, and I had these tests, and they didn't. They ran blood tests on me, and they didn't find anything that was out of the norm. But just looking at the test, one of the doctors said, "Well, I want you to have a colonoscopy and something else." And when I got the test back, I didn't do the test. I just got the blood test back, and I looked at it, and they were all within the range of normal. And then I started reading about these tests that they wanted to administer, and I was reading European journals because I trust European doctors. I think that they're probably ahead, or they're just their overall attitude I like better, because they go for things that work. It's more pragmatic, it seems to me. That anyway, they don't have all the money behind it that it seems to have in the United States. So I just started talking. I read these articles in Europe, and they don't give these tests so much anymore, because they find that if they do like a colonoscopy and they cut off some polyps, sometimes that kills that can do the patient in. So the success rate from doing the test is not necessarily very high, so you're taking a real risk. And I got a call from the people who were going to schedule my tests, and as soon as I started presenting that data that I wasn't really too chuffed about taking this test because I might die from it, and since my test results seemed normal, I didn't see why. It seems to me that it would be better to look at something else than to just give me these tests. And immediately the person with whom I was speaking put me on speakerphone and had a supervisor come over and talk to me. And it was as if they were both native English speakers, but as if they didn't understand what I was talking about, because after I explained what I was talking about, which is, mathematics and chances, and why would you do something if it might kill you, and if you don't do it, you might be fine. It's just a matter of odds. Anyway, the person interrupted me and said that they would get my doctor to call me and allay my fears. At no time during the conversation had I expressed any fear at all. And then pretty much shut me up and said, "Well, you're going to lose your place in the line, and now you won't have this test for a year," and da-da-da-da-da-da. So I was going to start talking about Wi-Fi and how I'd seen, Wi-Fi now in some countries is not allowed around kids, and here they're installing it, and my daughter-in-law is getting bullied at school board meetings.
Well, I'm getting the circling motion, which means we're out of time.
We're out of time. But
I'm
anyway,
sorry, to be continued.
So it just feels like bullying is the way to get things done here, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
Yeah, I think
I
you're
don't
right.
like to
Bullying
be an
is a big
animal.
part of our society from the top down. Thanks for watching Citizens Forum this week. Bye-bye.